Hello everyone, we're back again with one more video session prepared for you, and it will be the third episode called Earth from our production-based series. This time we're focusing on how to prepare the groundscape for a nighttime aerial shot done at our studio a while back, and it was a real commission. We will be showcasing you the work carried out on two main aspects when developing this type of views, with its own specifics, each one with its own specifics. The first part will be showing how to deal with the facades of the buildings, this time on a distance shot as opposed to the close-up street view we have covered in our previous session. In this case our camera is far away and we do have to cover many facades, which essentially employ similar techniques, but it does require a slight tweak in the approach and the overall control of the whole shot. The second part of the video will be focusing on the work methods associated with representing the nighttime street traffic, or the so-called light trails left by the vehicles moving at speed at night usually. It might make sense to note here that this is a phenomenon observed in photography, and it is caused by the long exposure times the nighttime shots usually require, meaning it is not a naturally occurring and observable event like the auroral lights, for example. My guess is it will be hard to find paintings predating the discovery of the camera depicting, and photography, let's say, depicting these effects. I know there might not have been many fast-moving vehicles at that time, but what is even more interesting, even more modern-day painters shy away from borrowing these phenomena seen through the camera lens. I will not elaborate further on the subject, although tempting, but all this goes to show some interesting facts and affinity of architects to photography, and how that attraction filters down in portraying architecture nowadays through the CG architectural visualizations. Although we have the tools and control over how we see things in our virtual scenes, more often than not we still have to obey the standards set by photography a while back. It's just an observation that I wanted to point out. Okay, with that introduction, let's dive into the nitty-gritty part of the video. This video will be sped up in order to condense the information. The actual footage is a record of the work done on a real image, and we'll focus only on these two aspects mentioned before, the facades and the streetscape. Okay, as you can see, we have our basic rendered image coming out of the render box, and a variety of masks that will be helping us down the line when selecting and isolating specific areas while working. There was a question by a viewer on one of our previous videos asking how do we manage to place reference images behind the facade frames of our rendered image, and this is how it's done with the use of these masks. Masks are simply set a flat color render of all your 3D objects in the scene that in effect are pre-selections of these same objects but in your 2D program. I hope that makes sense. In our case here, the reference material is applied freely on top of the render. In some areas we will be using our masks to tidy up these overlays as well, but there's a bit more freedom. All the work is done in Photoshop by the use of references of nighttime shots, and more specifically city facades and streetscape, let's say, shots. We had pre-selected quite a few of these beforehand, some from Gobotree, others from various search results on Google. The choice is yours here, but it is crucial to make these initial researches and gather enough source material. Some of these images could serve you to study them as a reference. Others, or parts of them, will be your source material that you will be applying over your rendered view. For a lot of you who are familiar with these techniques, all that might be a routine operation, so you might opt to skip parts of that or the rest of the video. But the aim is to help others that have not tested such approaches, or to just learn something new. Most of it will be quite self-explanatory, but every now and then I will be pointing out aspects that you might need to consider while preparing your references and applying them appropriately, so it all blends more naturally with your scene. So we have a nighttime render in front of us, although we still have the sun kissing the tops of the buildings, making the setup that bit more interesting, I suppose. But for the sake of argument, let's say it is a nighttime shot, although not pitch black. As you see, I have started already applying some of my references on top of the rendered facades, which on a lot of the context buildings are just flat surfaces. I have my source images on the color dodge layer placed in the frame for ease of use. You can experiment with some of the other overlays types in Photoshop, so it's up to you. You can use the maybe screen or vivid light or hard light and see what works best with the scene and the lighting and the contrast you have in your reference. As you see, I'm literally picking and copying various parts of the reference and applying them onto the facades using my artistic judgment, let's say, to define and interpret scale and what functions might be going on inside the various architectural volumes. In my case, I have a reference that will be providing me with some street lighting, ground level facades, possibly containing some public functions, and with a little bit of imagination, some more fragmented lights that could be seen as residential or offices perhaps. And I will just carry on picking pieces and applying them on various facades. It is crucial to try and match the scale, as it is important to achieve this natural look that our eyes and brains can pick up on quite fluently and raise the alarm bell straight away if something is not correct. You need to be aware what sort of size the building is and the size coming out of your reference, and try and match that as convincingly as possible. You will not get it perfect, but you need to create impression, let's say, for the right scale, just to marry them as close as possible. What I have done here as well, I've used some of the water reflections existing in the reference over parts of my water in the scene. The one rendered in the scene could do with some more enhancements, and as it lacks life, let's say, in general, it could do with some more imperfections and reflections, and I'm borrowing some pixels to add them and create a bit more vibrant water. So my preference, so my reference layer sits there, and I'm constantly grabbing pieces and applying them all over my scene. It is as simple as that. The trickery here, or the mastery, is matching the perspective and the scale of both worlds, the reference and the render. So let's just carry on with these activities. As I said before, for each shot we develop, we do carry an extensive research for photographic material, whether it be for lighting studies, context and surroundings, or purely references to be integrated into the view. This stage of the work, before it is even started, is really crucial, and it is as it kind of fine-tunes your brain and adapts your senses to that reality and that you're about to create. They are great sources of knowledge, all these references, and studying them through the process is very helpful in many ways. A lot of these images will be of similar spaces or surroundings and can give you clues about areas in your shot and help you judge and guide your choices when developing your view. They give you insights of how your scene should work in terms of light distribution, contrast, perhaps, apart from them being valuable material to place in your scene. So far I've been using only one reference to apply textures to quite a number of facades in my scene, and the logical concern will be, are we not going to read these to read repetitions, let's say, in our facades. But with these examples, as you see, even if we are seemingly using limited variety, things do look different as we are spreading them over a variety of areas and blending them over rich context, so the combined result is never the same. Plus, our copies of the source material get modified by changing the perspective in them, and second, we are wiping out various areas from them as we find fit, and all that further alters the impression on each facade. So don't be that worried about not having a huge variety, let's say. Major help is the varied geometry underneath as well, so it will, at the end, it will look convincing enough. All these lights add richness to the scene, but they're not the overwhelming element in the mix, so ultimately they tend to work quite convincingly. We will be relying as well on the observer's eyes to interpret these details we're adding, and the beauty of all this is that we are providing let's say, some kind of a platform for interactivity here. Not everyone will react and experience our shot in a similar manner. Each viewer will have to add something on their own to build up the full picture, and I hope that makes sense. We could have approached this differently with fully detailed 3D model, possibly even adding interior models and lights placed throughout the city and inside buildings, but that would have been a mammoth task requiring a lot of resources which we seldom can afford, even if we want to. By using this technique, we're dealing with one other very important aspect in portraying our world and its full imperfect glory, let's say, as achieving these faults and irregularities observed in our world is very hard thing to do with only the 3D model, let's say 3D methods and the approach of the fully rendered 3D scenes. And it's a good idea ultimately to strike some sort of balance between your renders coming out of the programs and render engines and techniques like these done in the post-production phase. Right, as you see, we are applying our technique very freely, and in effect we are summarizing or conceptualizing, shall we say, a scheme, a design, a city. We are creating the so-called artist's impression of a unbuilt environment. It conveys the feel of it and overall impact and impression rather than being a real-life simulation. Complete realism is not the aim here, as in most cases our work lives between the idea and the future building or buildings. The images we create are usually being used to further design and elaborate ideas by various disciplines, as a matter of fact, like landscape architects, light designers, engineers, architects, and various others. I could probably say it bears some resemblance to the pre-concept stages in the movie and game industries, where conceptual artists will work to establish the key design of the spaces along with the director before proceeding to the individual scenes and films. Imagining the whole scene here could easily be a nice backdrop for a movie. You can have hotels, theaters, restaurants, marinas, fancy flats where you can spread your screenplay comfortably. You will be spoiled for choice, really. Imagine that. In our case, the main actor in the shot is the development arranged around this central island. That is the bit that will be newly built, the central tower and all the smaller clusters around. The rest is the existing city, and our main task obviously is to represent the new development in its best possible look and blend it as convincingly as we can with its environment. The development on the right side is still at a master plan stage, let's say, which means there is good idea about the density of the development, the heights, but no clue about facade details and architectural language in general of each building. And that is why the technique works quite well. It does create the notion of facades without being specific. And it helps that it's a nighttime shot as well, as we can get away with less specifics. It is an exciting task, as we have to create this believable look of a city with half of it not even developed in detail. It is a good idea to select a number of facades facing similar directions, let's say one direction or close to one direction, using your normal channels, and that way you can just work in tandem, all the facades facing one direction. You can cover bigger areas quicker, as you can copy chunks of the facades onto neighboring buildings with minimal perspective adjustments, if any, maybe adjusting scale. Usually you have a couple of expressed directions in the shot, so you can have a set in your Photoshop file for each one of these dominant directions and build your overlays inside these sets. That way you have more control over the color, maybe contrast, brightness of each direction, and that will help. It is worth noting something else that comes as a benefit from this approach, and that is the time to react to clients' requests and feedback. It is a lot faster to modify, let's say, the functions and usages of specific zones in post-production rather than changing and updating your 3D models and re-rendering. And at this stage of the project, that is very likely to come as a request, as ideas are still morphing quite drastically behind the scenes, so we can react faster using these techniques. Should that have been a detailed, let's say, marketing stage maybe shot, then we most probably would have been provided with a lot more developed schemes which will dictate a slightly different approach, but that is not the case here. All this is a process that requires patience and time spent to cover all the facades. It is not to be underestimated or taken as a cheat, as in certain cases that could be an only option to build your reality, and it will require your full attention in order to get right. It will take a while till you start getting a convincing look, and the results won't be obvious from the beginning, but you will have to carry on and persist, and eventually you will get there. It is important to keep your image coherent, develop all areas in parallel, so at any one time you have consistency in the shot. Also, build your detail depending on the camera position. Spend more time on elements closest to the camera and summarize the distant ones, which sound obvious, but it's good to have it in mind. If you have a bit more time, in certain cases you can just carry on adding detail, and the general rule is the more the better, as long as you're in control of all that detail and how it spreads through the image. In most cases we are under pressure to deliver fast, and there isn't enough time to do enough detail, but equally the image is never finished as well. Ultimately we are commissioned to do the work, and with that comes obligation to cover as a minimum the client's scheme, and in their agendas context comes secondary, which is normal. In certain cases we would spend all the effort into making the main development look spectacular, and then be asked to keep the context as boxes, or sometimes transparent boxes, and naturally none of that makes any sense from the image point of view, and we need to figure out some ways of keeping the image in harmony, which is quite important. So context naturally will get less attention, but still some is needed. And you will see in our case, for example, we'll be covering our hours slightly differently than the foreground, overlaying the whole city shot over the buildings. Now going to the context facades a bit, and there in most cases you have some prominent buildings, and with them it is a bit easier to work because you can get hold of various photos on the internet or even Google Earth, photogrammetry if you want, as they are already built and documented. So we can analyze them, how they look day or night time, count the floors and so on. All that makes it easier to represent, or to interpret and represent. as opposed to the newly built, non-existent buildings. Okay, I will keep adding more. It is good to have some irregularity in the facades you pick. Avoid consistent and monotonous rhythms, let's say, of lights, unless you're looking for a specific scenario. Overall interior lighting is varied, so it kind of varies in most cases, except maybe for offices. And okay, this aspect of our representation is quite difficult to achieve with 3D means, only as you have to think about it and act more consciously, while here we are borrowing this so-called irregularity from the real world, already made for us, and applying it over our rendered geometry. Naturally, as we said, the main scheme that we are visualizing will be drawing, or has to draw more attention than the rest of the buildings, and it's a good idea to pick some more specific textures, references for it. They can be more vibrant and bright, and certain areas of the scheme could be accentuated by keeping these areas brighter and so on. You have to think about all that in relation to the overall composition as well, and inevitably have to balance it with the client's brief and feedback. Lobbies, crowns of buildings, water features could be highlighted along with some iconic parts of the design, let's say. This here is an interesting example where we have a circular facade, and I'm using the warp transform tool in Photoshop that allows me to match accurately, or more accurately, let's say, my workpiece over the oval facade. It is a bit tricky but doable using a flat facade over a curved surface. Okay, here I'm probably not matching completely well the floor heights, and there's some discrepancies, but we can afford not to be super specific with all the facades, and some error is allowed as some buildings I do not even see any floor slabs, so I need to just interpret. I need to be a bit more imaginative and use my judgment to do these buildings. When looking at it retrospectively, they are a bit off, but I think it will work okay as an overall shot. Now that we have shown all that till now, it is a good moment to point out that you will be facing some objective decisions and some subjective ones, and it's good to be aware of that. The objective ones are perspective lines and scale, as I said. You have to match these as best as possible, and the reference material should blend seamlessly with the rendered image underneath. The subjective and the subjective ones are the types of facade you applying, intensity of this facade, the color, contrast, and other aspects of them that could be subject to interpretation and specific briefs. And now we can move to another exciting activity, the car trails. This could be a lot of fun once you get to know the tricks. As you see, we're starting with some more reference materials prepared for that occasion, which are various photos of high resolution nighttime shots of cars zooming around. Plenty of these on Gobotree with the correct exposure, so you only get the trails as opposed to other elements not needed. You can easily go and take your own photos from any busy street, preferably from a high point. And remember to underexpose your shots for this specific task. Here the technique is slightly different. Using the wrap tool in Photoshop, you need to apply and transform the trails so they match our road network. Scale is not as crucial as with the facades. What is important though is to try and replicate the flow of traffic and make sure you're representing the correct directions for the region, the world region, let's say, you are working in. You could achieve some really convincing representations using these techniques. Using masks as well will help to block, let's say, trees, buildings and other areas that need to stay in front of, let's say, the road lights and the trails, the car trails. We could easily paint some street lighting while we're at it. And basically, sky is the limit. It's the amount of detail, but hopefully this shows a quick way of bringing some life in on the road in your shot. Finally, I will turn my attention to the distant context and overlay some generic city lights to support the overall look and feel of my shot. Again, using your normals maps, you can achieve a kind of more coherent look in your distant context. With that, I would like to wrap things up for this session, as again we did go over for quite a while, but I sincerely hope that it has been useful, and will kindly ask for your thumbs up and share the video if you found some value in it and think other people could benefit as well. I know there's a wide public potentially watching these, and for some it might be slightly overwhelming, all that has been shown, as we don't go in every little detail, let's say. But I encourage you to try and not be afraid to make a mistake, as nothing we make is perfect, but that is why it might end up being beautiful. So thank you again, and see you soon.